Well, happy Tuesday. It's time for this week's video. Get ready. Well, as you know, lately I do like taking questions and statements from our groups on Facebook, like the Friends of Mike Williams and the Gospel Revolution group, which is an open group, and the Gospel Revolution private group, which is a group that you can stay anonymous as far as nobody else in your Facebook world will know that you are in that group or posting in that group. You have complete privacy. So anyway, a gospel revolutionary posted a question yesterday in the group, and I want to read it to you. And I suppose I will read my answer to it as well. Okay. He asks, is Judas prophesied in the Old Testament? Reference, thanks. My answer was brief. I like to be brief and to the point so that you can just take what I said and then you can think about why I said it and think for yourself and get to that same point yourself. I don't want to tell people what to think. I want to say something that will inspire them to do their thinking. So anyway, question was, is Judas prophesied in the Old Testament? Reference, thanks. My answer was no and yes. The prophecies are about Jesus, what he would do, and what would happen. One of which was being sold or sold out for a few pieces of silver. And that is definitely referenced and prophesied in the scriptures and in the Old Testament. That is one of the things that was foretold, that he would be sold for some pieces of silver. It was actually foretold in a couple different stories. But here's the true reason why I want to talk about this. The question was about Judas and whether Judas was prophesied about in the Old Testament. And that is where you can stray off and in the process lose a lot of the validity of the gospel. You can start degrading the validity of Jesus Christ himself. Jesus said that the Old Testament, the scriptures, were about him. They are they that spoke of him. So the Old Testament, the law, the Psalms, the prophets, what you find in the Jewish scriptures spoke of him. And so, yes, it talked about him, what he would do, what he would accomplish, what would happen to him, things like that. If you start using particular people and saying they were also prophesied in the Old Testament, you're starting to take away from Jesus and what he accomplished. And in other words, if Judas were prophesied, then we needed Judas to play a role. And without Judas, this whole gospel wouldn't have come together. No. If it weren't Judas, it would have been somebody else. And the reason that we should not ever think that the Old Testament was about a city playing a role, a person playing a role, an individual playing a role, a specific individual with a specific name, whether it's Judas or Peter or John or Abraham, where their role, that person themselves, were instrumental in the gospel truth, the salvation and the redemption of the world. Because that takes away from Jesus. Paul even talked about the fact that it was all Christ, only Christ. Martin Luther, he said, sola fide, sola spiritus, sola sanctum, and sola gratia, and sola Christo. He said it was only Christ, only grace, only the Spirit and only faith, and he sums it up as only Christ. The gospel is only about Christ. When you start looking for the scriptures which foretold of Christ and Christ alone, and you want to start include other people as having been significant in this story and in this salvation and in this redemption, you're starting to take away from the magnitude and the power of what Jesus did and what this story and what this gospel is about. So it would be an error, because that will just lead you off into rabbit trails away from the fundamental truth of the gospel itself. And I don't recommend doing it. Not when you consider there's so much more to learn just knowing fundamentally the scriptures were about Jesus and it was Christ alone. And when you read the scriptures, bearing that in mind, you can learn more about the gospel, the depth of the gospel, the power of the gospel, and the beauty of the gospel. And I know that's revolutionary, but have a revolutionary week.